In this episode, we will discuss the concept of inheritance in the object-oriented programming. To illustrate the inheritance, let's imagine we have a car represented by a class vehicle. The vehicle could have several attributes, which could be represented by properties such as make, maximum speed, number of wheels and seats. Class with these properties could also represent a van or a truck, or in fact, any other vehicle type, all of which could require some additional properties or methods that wouldn't be shared with other types. For instance, car could have a property such as convertible to indicate whether the car is of a convertible type, one that would not apply to a van or a truck. Van could have a property called capacity to indicate its capacity, while truck a property called max weight to indicate maximum weight it can handle. We could now create three new classes called car, van, and truck. But as you can see, they all share properties such as make, max speed, wheels and seats, and could potentially share the same methods and constants. As you may remember from the previous season, I mentioned that in programming duplicated code is considered a bad practice, and you should try and avoid repeating yourself. To remove duplicated code from our three classes, we can use the inheritance in order to store common elements in a superclass. In our example, we call it vehicle, and let the subclasses to inherit from it. Let's have a look at what PHP documentation says about inheritance. PHP documentation says that inheritance is a well-established programming principle, and PHP makes use of this principle in its object model. This principle will affect the way many classes and objects relate to each other. For example, when you extend a class, the subclass inherits all of the public and protected methods from the parent class. And don't worry about the public and protected, as I said earlier, we haven't discussed visibility yet, but just remember the public and protected will be able to inherit from the parent. Unless a class overrides those methods, they will remain their original functionality. Because from within a subclass you can override properties and methods of the parent class. This is useful for defining and abstracting functionality and permits the implementation of additional functionality in similar objects without the need to re-implement all of the shared functionality. And then we have a few examples and so on. Let's now move to our editor. Following from the previous exercise, let's remove this echo statement. We are going to keep the person and the address objects here, but what I want to do here is create several different person types. First one will be a student, then we're going to have a musician, and the last one will be the employee. So we're starting with the student. So new class inside of the source directory, we're going for the student, and within this class will have two properties. First one will be public year, and then the next one will be public school. And for the year, let's just put doc block straight away. Year is going to be an integer, and the school will be an instance of the class school. We haven't got this class yet, so let's quickly create it. School, and a school, just for simplicity, we are going to have one property, which will be a name, and it's going to be of the string type. So var string, and that's our school class. We don't have to do anything else. This is obviously just an exercise. In the real life project, you most certainly would have more properties and so on. Now, I would like student class to also contain the properties and methods that the person class has. So the way to do it is to use the keyword extend. Extends after the class name and then the class that we want to extend. In our case, is going to be person. And now what happens basically, this person becomes a parent class of this student subclass. If we go back to our index.php, I'm going to comment all this code that we've got here and start at the beginning. I'm going to start with the student equals new student. Obviously, we cannot access this class yet because we haven't required it. So let's just duplicate the slide and add student.php. There we go. So now the student class is available within this index.php file. The next thing I'm going to do is to specify student and have a look at what's going to happen once I'm going to put this arrow here. You can see address, email, all these methods and properties which are within the person class are now available on the instance of the student class. So what I can do is start with the first name, for instance, equals Sebastian, then student last name, Solinsky, then we have student email, which is going to be info@ssdtutorials.com, and then student telephone equals, let's just put the same fake number, and there we go. So now if I'm going to call echo student say email link, save it and preview it in the browser, and you see that it works exactly the same as before when we're using just the person class. But if we go back to the editor and let's actually add those other properties. So student, we have year as well. Yeah, let's say 7. Then we have student, and student also had school property. Now we haven't got the school object instance created yet, so I'm just going to put school and then school variable. Let's just copy this variable, and before we actually create the student, right above it, let's create school, new school instance, and again let's include this file here, so school within the source directory. So we have new school, and for the school has a property name, so we're going to say something like University of Brighton, for instance. And now we have the school instance associated with the property of the student. So if I now do, rather than email student email link, let's just do school, and then let's get name property of the school object. If we save it, preview it in the browser, and there we go, University of Brighton. So you can see exactly the same way as we had before with this address and a person class. Now we can do the same with the school property of the student instance, where we can actually delegate the call to the property name of the school object. Okay, so that's this. Now, next thing that I want to do is to show you another thing about the parent classes, because now I don't think I need this person class to be instantiatable. In other words, I don't want the person class to anyone to be able to instantiate the person class on its own, because we're going to have all these other classes which will extend it. So this person I want to make only a parent class, not the class that you can instantiate on your own and then associate properties and work with it. So I'm going to remove all this. What I'm also going to do is uncomment this address instance here. So we've got this address. Rather than echoing anything, let's just remove this. And now that we have instance of the address, let's replace this person instance here with the student. So we're now associating this address with this student. So now the student has property school, which is the instance of the school class, and then property address, which is the instance of the address class. Obviously, the property address exists on the person class, which this student class extends. That's why we have access to it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to show you how to make this person class uninstantiatable, so that no one can instantiate this class on its own. And in order to do it, you simply need to prepend it with the abstract keyword. So before the class, abstract space, and then we have class and the name of the class. Once you made this class abstract, no one will be able to instantiate it. Let's just, for the sake of this exercise, create the person instance, person equals new person. And you see that my ID automatically highlights it. It tells me that cannot instantiate abstract class person. So if I save it and try and preview it in the browser, I'm getting the fatal error telling uncaught error cannot instantiate abstract class person. So now you can see that if you make the class abstract, you will not be able to instantiate it. You can only extend it. this is basically automatically becoming the parent class of any subclass that might be extending it. So now student can extend person, and student can be instantiated, while person on its own can't. So let's close this person and student class. The next one we're going to create is going to be a musician. So let's create another class, call it musician. And musician will have some sort of instrument. So if we create a property instrument, so public instrument, and instrument will be an instance of the instrument object. So for the var, we're going to have instrument. We don't have this class yet, so let's quickly create it within the source directory again. New class instrument, so it's just basically instrument.php, and then obviously the class definition. And the instrument, for the instrument, what I'm going to put is basically the type. So public type, and it's going to be a string. There we go. We can close this class. And within this musician class, I want to show you how you can override the method declared on the parent class. In our case, it's going to be a full name method, which exists on the person class. So to inherit all the properties and methods of the person class, let's quickly extend it. So musician extends person, and now we have access to all these properties and methods. And I want to override this full name method. So what I'm going to do is copy this entire method from within the person class and paste it inside of the musician class. Now that we have access to this person, what we're doing, we overwriting the default behavior of this method. So we are going to keep the first and last name, which we're inheriting from within the person class. But what I'm also going to add is concatenated within the bracket, then space bracket, and I'm going to add this instrument. And instrument has the type property. So I'm going to add this in between brackets after the first and last name, basically, when we're calling this full name method. So that's pretty much our musician class. And let's go back to our index.php. What I'm going to do is remove all this that we've got here. And let's not remove it. Let's just overwrite it. So first of all, we're going to create the instance of the instrument. So instrument equals new instrument. And again, you can keep the brackets at the end, but I tend to remove them if there's no constructor, and we will discuss constructors and destructors later on. Instrument, then we go for the type, and it's going to be bass guitar. So we've got instance of the instrument class. Now, rather than student, what I'm going to do is override all this with the musician. There we go. And rather than new student, is going to be new musician. Obviously, we don't have this class here within this file. So let's quickly duplicate the last line. First of all, instrument is what we need. And the second file that we need is called musician. So we've got both of these available here. We don't have, as you can see, the ID automatically highlights it. We don't have year property on the musician class, or school neither. So what we need to do is to basically remove this year. And what I'm going to do with the school, I'm going to overwrite it with instrument and associate it with the instance of the instrument class. So now we have this instrument property, which is within the musician class, and it stores the instance of this instrument object. And again, the address stays the same way, and rather than student, obviously we will overwrite it with the musician. So now at the end, what I'm going to do is now echo musician, and I'm going to call this full name method. And let's see what it's going to give us. So if we go back to the browser, refresh, and as you can see, the overwritten full name method now contains the name of the instrument within the brackets, the way we did it from within the musician class. So we overwritten the default full name method, which is inside of the person, with our own one from within the musician class. This did not overwrite any other full name class, which you could find within the student. Student will use the default one from within the person, but just because within the musician we've overwritten it, That's why we're getting a different result than the default one from within the person class. So we've got first name, last name, and then concatenated within the brackets, we have the instrument and whatever is associated with the type property of this instrument class instance. If we go back to index.php, you'll see that if I echo musician full address, it will also work. I'm going to comment this full name call here. So let's comment it, go back to the browser. There we go. And the full address works exactly the same way as it did with just the person instance. So you can see all the methods and properties work exactly the same as with the person when it wasn't the abstract class, when it was just a normal standard class. They work exactly the same on any instance of these child or subclasses which extend it. So another thing, we said we're going to have another class which is going to be employee. Let's quickly create this one, employee, and the employee one is going to have two properties, public number and public company. And the number is simply going to be I'm going to do it an integer, but it obviously can be a mixed result. It might be the string containing numbers and letters and so on. But I'm going to keep it simple, basically just stick to integer for this one. And then for the company, we're going to have company instance. And again, we don't have company here. Let's quickly create it. So new class company. And the company class will simply have its property called name, so public name, and we're just going to keep it like this. And it's going to be a string type, so doc block as well for this one, string. Save it, close it, and we can close the employee as well. And again, you would do exactly the same as we did with the instrument and the musician, or with the school or student. So let's replace quickly this instrument with the company. And it's going to be, rather than instrument, it's going to be company now. And rather than type, it's got property name, which we're going to change to, say, SSD tutorials. Then rather than musician, we are going to have employee. And let's quickly import these two classes as well. So first one is company. Then we have employee. So these are now available. But as you can see, let's quickly actually override this musician variable here. And let's change it to employee. As you can see, these properties are highlighted. And why are they highlighted? Because if we go back to the employee class, you can see we haven't extended the person class. That's why we don't have access to these properties. So let's quickly extend person, and now if we save it, go back, as you can see, all these highlights are gone, apart from the last one, instrument, because employee class does not have instrument property. The instrument was the property of the musician class, but obviously we no longer are working with the musician instance, we're working with the employee instance. So this one has number and a company. So let's quickly do it. So company is going to be a company, but before this, let's add another one, employee number, and let's just put 1, 2, 3. And then obviously we're associating the address with the employee as well. So if we save it, preview it in the browser, it's going to give us exactly the same result. And it's all due to the fact that we obviously are able to use one class within the other. So we can use this person class and all its properties, methods, and even constants are automatically available from within the class that extends it. Now, we've done, if we go back to the musician, when we've overwritten this full name method, you can see that I'm referring to the properties on the parent class using this pseudo variable. Because when you are extending a class, you have access to the same properties and methods, you can use this keyword as if you were referring to the properties and methods from within the same class. So that's one of the things. Now, if we open the person class and scroll down, you can see that when we were referring to the constants, we were using the self keyword and 2 colons. Now, when you are referring to the constants of the parent class, the class that you're extending, if we go back to the musician, for instance, you would use the keyword parent In this case, let's say I'm going to create just a test method, public function, and we're going to call it get, say, telephone constant. And we're only going to keep it for a short moment just to show you how we actually can refer to this constant. Return, and this time, rather than self, we would use parent. And the same approach, 2 colons, and then href tel, in this case, because we're referring to the constant. If we save it, and if I go back to the index.php file, what I'm going to do now is echo employee, because we actually, it needs to be a musician. So let's just move this method from within the musician to the employee, because we have instance of the employee. Let's save it and close this musician, and let's move it to the employee class, so we have access from this object that we actually have here. Rather than full address, let's just call this get telephone constant. If I save it, preview it in a browser, and there we go. We've got this tel associated, the value associated with this constant on the person class. So basically, it's href telephone constant now can be referred to from within any class that extends it using the parent keyword. So from within the same class where the constant is defined, we're using self. From within any subclasses, we use parent, because it's a constant of the parent class.